The average foundation gives $50,000 over 12 months, and you're expected to solve this big social issue. And so what we're saying is, okay, well, what would you do with 10 million?
Welcome to the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange, a podcast from IPM Advancement. We believe strong nonprofits can change the world, and at IPM, our job is to make sure your organization is one of them. With each episode, our goal is to bring you insightful conversations with thought leaders from across the nonprofit sector. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome, listeners, to another episode of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. I'm your host, Josh Gryniewicz, bringing you a new interview in my series on narrative strategy. Joining me today is Marc Moorghen, Vice President of Marketing Communications at Lever for Change. To date, Lever for Change has influenced more than $2.5 billion, that's with a B, in grants and provided support to over 500 organizations. In this interview, Marc and I will be discussing how open calls and bold ideas are reshaping access to philanthropic funding. If you're a nonprofit leader or fundraiser who has ever wondered about how to get on a funder's radar, how to think bigger about your work, or how storytelling and clear narrative can open doors to opportunities you didn't think possible, this conversation is for you. We'll share practical insights on how organizations of any size can use narrative, feedback, and bold thinking to strengthen their case for support and wow funders. Welcome, Marc.
Josh, good to be here.
So happy to see you.
Yeah, so happy to be here with you. Thank you for the invitation.
So you and I have had a lot of conversations about what you're doing with Lever for Change. And I think there's something special and unique about the way you are approaching funding and ultimately what that means for strategic storytelling and for narrative strategy. And so to get listeners up to speed, what was the key problem you saw nonprofits struggling with? And how has Lever for Change turned that into an opportunity for them?
Yeah, and I just want to preface it by saying, I've always enjoyed our conversations together because I feel like we have the most fascinating conversations and we always wish that we could share them out with other people. So glad that we have this opportunity, and yeah, happy to dive into what Lever for Change does and have this conversation. At its core, we're focused on the fact that promising nonprofits with new ideas always struggle to find support, and the support that they need to do what they want to do. So we partner with donors like Melinda French Gates, Mackenzie Scott, the Lego Foundation, and many, many more to host open calls to basically ensure that every nonprofit has the opportunity to get funding, the funding that they need. So to date, we've influenced over $2.5 billion and supported more than 500 organizations around the world. So nearly half of that money has gone to organizations after the end of the open call. So the thing that we're now well known for is our open calls and the award money that goes with that. But really, I think one of the most interesting things about what we do is what happens after the open calls when organizations, so the finalists, the awardees, the top-ranked organizations, join our network, and then we continue to look for funding for them beyond the open call. So organizations join our Bold Solutions network, and we provide donors with ongoing opportunities basically to discover and support new initiatives. So we like to say that we accelerate positive social change.
Love that.
And that we're a pipeline for ideas, essentially.
I love that. And what would you say is a hard truth that nonprofits need to face about funding, especially smaller nonprofits? How is Lever for Change helping address that?
Well, I think the best kept secret about philanthropy that we all know is that it depends on who you know, right? If you know a program officer or you know a board member, you stand a much better chance of getting a grant. So typically the usual suspects get funding, and where Lever for Change is very different is we've created this open, inclusive process where we recognize that we don't have the best ideas for how to solve a particular issue. So what we're saying is, you are experiencing this issue, you are working on this, come to us with your big, bold ideas and tell us how you think we should solve the problem. And I think what that does is it gives smaller organizations, it gives organizations that are not usually on a funder's radar the opportunity to to propose a solution and to be heard and to have an opportunity, so we're kind of leveling the playing field a little bit so that people have the opportunity to give us their ideas and showcase an idea that a funder otherwise might not have seen. So it's really good for the nonprofits, and it's really good for the funders too, because what it does is it expands a funder's network, it expands their horizons. And I think where we add a lot of value is we're able to process a lot of applications and to kind of make sense of what people are proposing, and to bring a little bit of order to the complexity of it. But we really do give organizations the space to explain what they do. We give them the opportunity and the platform, and we try to help organizations put their best foot forward. So it doesn't really it doesn't favor large organizations. It's actually a really good way, I think, for smaller organizations to propose ideas. And I've seen some wonderful collaborations too. So sometimes partnerships between larger organizations, smaller organizations, academic institutions. I think it's a really interesting way of flipping the philanthropic model on its head. So usually, foundations like to say, we don't accept unsolicited proposals. And that is so frustrating as a nonprofit looking for funding. And what we've done essentially is say, send us your unsolicited proposals.
Right.
And flip the model on its head and really look for other people to tell us what they think we should be doing. And I think that's a really interesting approach.
Well, and to your point, I feel like the response to that was always like, okay, so how do we get solicited?
Right? Exactly. And the answer is, well, you have to know somebody. And that's always, that's the big secret in philanthropy. Yeah.
So pulling that thread a little more, what advice would you give organizations to make the most out of these open calls that you offer?
The best way for an organization to approach an open call, like a Lever for Change open call, and there are many other vehicles like ours that try different funding approaches, but for Lever for Change, I think it's really a learning opportunity. So I see a lot of organizations apply, and there's hesitation. People think, should we apply? Do we have the time to do this? It's a time commitment and an effort commitment. And we recognize that. We're very, very attuned to feedback and what people think about the process. And we're constantly tweaking it and trying to improve it and make it easier for organizations to apply, to lower the barrier to entry for organizations, make it more accessible and inclusive.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest takeaway for me would be that it's a learning opportunity. Apply, see what kinds of questions are being asked. You have time. So initially there's a registration period and then an application period. So you register for an open call and then you have another month to actually draft up your application. So if you're an early bird, you have perhaps 3 months to do this.
Yeah.
And if you wait till the last minute, it's a different proposition altogether. But there's time, right? So you have time to think about it and to really think about a problem at that scale. So we started out, and what made us really different at the time, 6 years ago when the organization started, was we would have a minimum award of $10 million for an idea. And that's really a very different way of approaching it. So when organizations are applying, they have to think at that scale. And that's really what we're trying to encourage, right?
Yeah.
So what would you do with $10 million? I think we're in a moment too where particularly when organizations are struggling for funding, there's this mindset of organizations competing for funding and there's scarcity, there's not enough funding for all of the great ideas out there. And at the same time, people are thinking very tactically, very, very small. And what we're saying is, what do you need to solve the problem? There's this fact that we use a lot, which is that we've pieced together from different sources that the average foundation in the US gives $50,000 in a grant of $50,000 over 12 months. And you're expected to solve this big social issue with that kind of money in that time frame. And so what we're saying is, okay, well, what would you do with 10 million? And I think it's a really different way for organizations to think about an issue and to think about what they would do if they had that kind of money. So there is the reality that only some organizations will get funding through this process during the open call. And like I said, we continue to look for funding beyond the open call, what we call follow-on funding. But in the moment, I think there's also an opportunity to learn, right? So what would it look like if we usually do a $500,000 project? What would it look like at 10 million? And it gives the organizations the opportunity to really think bigger and to start planning and to be very practical about things. And I think that's where you identify, well, here are some of the gaps in what we're thinking. Maybe we need partners here and there. And maybe we could do this. We hadn't thought about that, but with this kind of money, we could do this.
Right.
So I think it's an opportunity. And then the thing that I really value about our process is that there's feedback. So organizations receive feedback about their applications from expert reviewers, but also from peer organizations that apply. So as part of your application, you also agree to evaluate other proposals, 4 or 5 other proposals. And so that feedback is shared with organizations, and then they can use that to build their case for support. And I think that's really valuable too. Yeah, I've worked with funders who didn't necessarily share any of the feedback, so it would be available, but to the funder organization. And I think what's really different here is we're saying, no, we want you to put your best foot forward. So here's some information that you can use to keep iterating. And maybe it didn't work for this one, but apply for another one and use the same proposal, maybe tweak it a little bit and improve it, and then use it with other funders and other platforms. Like, you know, there are other funder collaboratives like Co-Impact and Blue Meridian Partners and the TED Audacious Project, Borealis Philanthropy. There are many, many new platforms.
IDEO.
Right. And so if we're not a good fit, maybe somebody else will be. And we also share that information behind the scenes with these other partners too. So we're always actively trying to find funding for as many organizations as we can. And I think it's worth the effort of applying just for that, you know, for feedback and for the opportunity to get in front of other funders, particularly if you're a small organization.
I love that. Such a game changer, especially this whole ecosystem that you're building. So this interview is part of my series on strategic storytelling. And where I'd love to go next, Marc, is talking about what role strategic storytelling plays in this process and what advice you would have for listeners who are using storytelling.
I think at a very high level, storytelling is key because we tend to think of funders as very analytical people who exist on a different plane from us. But essentially, we're talking about people, and people respond to storytelling. They have since the dawn of time. It makes people feel something. So I think where we are as storytellers right now in our field is we're trying to move people to action. And the tools that we have at our disposal increasingly are data, so the impact, and then the storytelling, the emotional piece of it. And I think those two things together, head and heart, are really what move people to action. So I think for Lever for Change, it's no different. You know, it's in terms of how people pitch their story. It's always about, here's how you're going to make a difference, and here's how you're going to make a difference in somebody's life. And I think those two pieces are really what motivate people to give. Whether you're talking about small funders or large funders, I think we're in an era where you can do that more effectively than ever. And so I always approach organizations as stories, right? What is your story? What is the DNA of this organization? What is it that's unique about you? What's going to excite people? And that's actually always the most fun part of my job. I love kind of teasing that out and finding the thing that's going to interest people and move them. And I remember when I started Lever for Change, in the early stages, it was very hard to explain the concept because it seemed very complicated, and it would take us a long time to get to the aha moment, you know. But when people really got it, they were excited about what we did. So my goal as a communicator within an organization has been, how do we get to that aha moment faster?
Right.
Every year we've worked a little bit more to improve how we message things, how we share our stories, how we complement what people are perceiving about our story as an organization, about the stories of our network, and also being good conversationalists and storytellers in the sense of listening and allowing other people to speak. So I think that's a huge part that we sometimes miss too. We broadcast out, right? We tell stories, but we don't really engage in conversation. And if you're having a conversation with somebody socially, you know, in your life, you will listen to what they have to say. If you're a good conversationalist, you'll listen to what they have to say, and let them speak and hopefully learn something too. For instance, I always learn so much from our conversations, and then it gets me thinking about, oh, is there something that I could apply to what I'm doing, or how can I tell my story better? How can I tell our story better? And I think that's at the heart of what we do, the head and the heart.
Awesome. So just kind of following through on that, you mentioned the support that goes beyond the flashy open call. Can you talk a little more about the Bold Solutions Network and how you use it to support organizations even after that initial call?
So yes, the open calls are flashy, and they're designed to be that way because they're essentially, I think of what we do as a pipeline, right? So we're trying to get big, bold ideas into this pipeline and then find funding for the organizations. The open call is really the mechanism to get organizations into this pipeline. And certain funders have a real interest in doing that because, for instance, they want to see organizations that are not on their radar, not the usual suspects, or they want to try something different than they've done before, or a different geography. And they have all kinds of reasons for doing it. And that is hugely valuable. And then some of these organizations go into the pipeline and they become part of the network. And then other funders who don't necessarily want to do an open call can find opportunities to fund. So for instance, if you don't want to run an open call because it's an investment of about a year to a year and a half, some funders want to fund right now.
Right.
And I think we all understand the urgency of some of the work that we do. They can invest in organizations in the network because we've essentially vetted them. And we'd like to say we've de-risked them, right? So we've made them, we've pretty much done the work for funders and done the due diligence, and we share that with organizations. So we share thematic collections of proposals. We share geographic, by size. We do all kinds of ways of sorting the information for funders. And we share that information freely with other organizations. And we've done that thousands of times behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. It's been really, I think, gratifying to see how much traction there's been in terms of this idea taking on or taking off. Because when I remember the very, very beginning of this idea, I was in LA, I was working at the Hilton Foundation at the time. And I remember Julia Stash, who was the president of the MacArthur Foundation at the time, coming to LA and speaking to a room full of grant makers and basically pitching this idea of a $100 million grant called 100 and Change. And I remember at the time, we just thought, what is this? It was so different from anything that we'd heard at that point. And then at the end of the process, the initial 100 million went to Sesame Workshop and the International Rescue Committee. Fantastic project. And at the Hilton Foundation, we approached MacArthur behind the scenes and said, what did you find in terms of organizations working on homelessness or safe water, or the things that we were funding? And the foundation shared all of that information freely and gave us some great leads, essentially. And it turns out a whole bunch of other funders did the same thing. And MacArthur decided that it would be a good thing to maybe spin off as Lever for Change and offer it to other funders. And so just seeing how that idea has taken off, where you can, it's less about us. It's more about the ideas, right? It's giving people the space and the opportunity to pitch ideas and to do it in a fulsome way. It's not Shark Tank. People often say, "Oh, isn't that like Shark Tank?" Not really. It's a more thoughtful, fulsome way of hearing what people are saying and the ideas that they're offering. And I've just seen so many different instances along the way. I'm trying to think of some good examples. For instance, I think the Lego Foundation's Build a World of Play was really fascinating just to see how it could be done on a global scale, and we did it faster than we ever had done before. And just all of these great ideas came out of it, and then we created a solutions hub to continue pitching some of these ideas. And it was just great to see how excited people were about it. And then we saw the same thing with the yield giving open call from Mackenzie Scott. That was amazing because initially we'd planned to do, I think it was 250 million in grants. And it ended up being 640 million to 391 organizations. I think I got that right, across the US. But just to see the energy and the joy that kind of spread throughout the community. And that was really inspiring. But it was inspiring because it allowed organizations to then energize their base, right, their support base, and go out into communities. We did very little in terms of communications, but we provided some materials for organizations to share out. And then they went and spread the news and talked about it. And what it did was it attracted more funders. And so I think that idea that's really what fascinates me most about what we do and really inspires me, is just seeing the leverage piece, right? Where it inspires more action and more funding and more ideas and more partnerships and all of that good stuff.
And Marc, so first of all, I owe you an apology because I'm sure that I've described it as Shark Tank to people.
It's way less sharky.
Yeah. Months ago when you were explaining for the umpteenth time what you actually do, that was the light bulb moment. It was like, oh, okay, this isn't Shark Tank. It's like an actual investment in bringing this solution to life. But the follow-up question that I had is, all of this information that you're talking about, is that shared? Is that public somewhere? Is that accessible on your website?
Well, thank you for asking. And just to close the loop on the Shark Tank thing, the reason that I don't think it's like Shark Tank is because we're not really pitting organizations against each other. It's not really a competition. It's an opportunity to try and find funding for as many organizations as possible. So in a way, it's kind of the opposite.
Yeah.
But to that point, we do have a list of organizations that we share who are in our network, active members. So if you go to our website, leverforchange.org, there's a section called Solutions. And in the Solutions section, you can look through the different organizations. So they're the top ranked organizations in our network. And each organization has a profile and sometimes a video, sometimes a link where you can donate directly if they've set up that functionality. And we also offer, so behind the scenes, and it's not secret, so open to all, we do also help funders with more information that we have available behind the scenes. So on our website, publicly facing, we have 350 plus active organizations. Behind the scenes, we have 6,000 or 7,000 organizations in our collection. And we do share that information freely with other funders so they can approach us. We're very easy to find, and we're always happy to have conversations, and we're always actively looking for new partnerships and creative ways to get funding to organizations, particularly when there's a feeling of urgency. That's a great way for organizations to get started and to fund straight away.
Awesome. And the website is
leverforchange.org.
Got it.
And the solutions section has it.
All right. So, Marc, one of the things that comes to mind about this exercise of what would you do with $10 million is how it changes the way organizations view their work and the issue they're trying to solve. Do you have an example of, let's say, a small organization? They've never even raised $1 million, let alone 10. And then they go through this process and they come out the other side with a completely new way of seeing the landscape. Like, it transformed the way they're making change in the world.
Yeah, I love that. And there are so many examples of fantastic organizations doing work that kind of fit that description. There's one example that I really, really, really like for this. And it's from the Larsen & Lamb Iconic Impact Award, which was for the well-being of refugees and displaced persons. It was a global open call for 10 million. And it actually ended up channeling, I think, 24.25 million to different organizations. But that 10 million actually went to a coalition of 6 organizations, and it was called Resourcing Refugees Leadership Initiative, RRLI. The acronym is really. And it's a coalition of 6 smaller organizations that are refugee-led organizations in different areas of the world. And they came together to propose a solution, and they got the 10 million in funding. And they were the least likely contenders in traditional funding scenes. The money would have gone to a big international NGO,
right?
That works on the ground, but that has headquarters elsewhere, etc. this was a coalition of refugee-led organizations. And it was fascinating because they exemplified what we talk about, which is giving people agency, right? Giving people in the communities and who understand the problems firsthand and experience them firsthand, the agency to propose solutions about how to solve the issues that they face. And these organizations hadn't really received significant funding before. So all of a sudden, these 6 organizations, the coalition had 10 million. And what it allowed them to do beyond the practical programmatic work is it also gave them a voice. So all of a sudden they were credible and were invited into conferences and meetings and gatherings of funders where typically those voices were not heard. And so I saw some great examples of some of the leaders. The lead organization was Asylum Access, but there were 5 others, and hearing their leaders speak at different events and tell funders, no, this is what we need. That was just
amazing.
It was one of the most gratifying experiences, I think, of my career, just to know that the money could be transformative. Because we talk about transformational funding or transformative funding, and that was just such a clear example of it, where these organizations are working in areas of the world where displaced persons are an increasingly large number of people, and it's become a really big issue and a crisis in a lot of areas of the world. And to see these organizations tell the people with the money where they needed the money to flow was really enlightening.
So powerful.
Yeah, very, very powerful. So Resourcing Refugee Leadership Initiative. I would check them out.
How about one more example? What about an organization that went through this open call process and didn't get the grant, but they were able to use what they learned to get funding from other sources? Maybe it changed the way they tell their story or make their case for support. Do you have any examples of that?
Yes. And actually, we shared an article about this because it is an interesting phenomenon. So the short answer is Nest 360, which is an organization focusing on infant mortality. They were an applicant for 100 and change. The MacArthur Foundation sponsored $100 million initiative, and we're on round 3 right now, so stay tuned about that one. But Nest 360 didn't get the $100 million. And that's a very difficult thing. And I recognize that for all of the organizations that don't receive the award money for the initial big announcement, as I like to think of it, it's a tough journey sometimes, and we recognize that. We do support organizations and try to strengthen them and try to help them find other opportunities. And Nest 360 is actually a shining example of what organizations can do when they don't receive that award money. So they took the show on the road, and essentially they pitched it to other funders and their support base, and they actually managed to leverage, I think it was 68 million in support for Nest.
Awesome.
And so that translated to something like 65 hospitals and,
amazing,
if I'm remembering correctly, 80,000 newborns in sub-Saharan countries. So that's a very clear example of where there was impact beyond the award.
I love that.
And they're a shining example of what the potential is to find funding, how to get to a place where you're making the case for support, you're telling your story in a really engaging way. And I would encourage you all to check out the story on our website. I think it's called Something Amazing Happened. And it's basically something amazing happened beyond the story.
Is it something we can include in the show notes?
Yes, I can provide a link for that. Yeah.
Great.
And it's a great story. It's a perfect example of why there is value in participating, and then what you can do beyond the award money, what the opportunity is.
Fantastic. Thanks, Marc. This has been a great conversation. Last question. What gives you the most hope right now about the future of fundraising and philanthropy?
I'm really excited about this moment in terms of where we are as communicators. I think I recognize that we can do a better job. I think that we don't necessarily always do a good job of marrying head and heart, right? We tend to focus on one or the other. And I think in the past few years, what I've seen, when I was a consultant at the same time as you, Josh, was people being very effective about educating others and telling them the what and the how of a program. They weren't necessarily good at saying why. And I think what really motivates donors is like, why are you doing this? Why should I give my money to this? Why are you spending your time and your effort and your life on this mission? Yeah. And that's a huge opportunity, I think, to share with people why this is so important. And in this moment, that is more important than ever. And it's an opportunity, I think, for organizations to distinguish themselves a little bit, because there are so many great organizations out there. And that's the hard part of what we do. We can't fund everybody clearly through these mechanisms. But it's truly amazing to see how many outstanding organizations out there are doing this work every day, day in, day out, and how it impacts people's lives. And I think that's the main thing that I'm focused on. People talk about narrative change and narrative shift, and there are some great examples out there right now of people doing great work. And I think it's about, how do we move people to action? And that's really what motivates me every day. That is really what I think about. And I try to always improve. How do we tell better stories and move people to action?
Awesome. All right. So what are ways that people can stay tuned to things that Lever for Change is initiatives, new initiatives, or open calls that they're putting forward, or, on the back end work that Lever for Change is leveraging?
putting the leverage back in Lever. So I do think the easiest way to stay up to date on what we're doing and to be notified about opportunities as soon as they're announced is to go to our website, leverforchange.org, and to scroll down to the bottom of the page, and there's a sign up button for news and information that go straight into your inbox, and you'll be the first to know as soon as we announce either an opportunity or the results of one of the open calls. And we also have a quarterly newsletter. So that's just a nice, easy way to stay up to date and informed. We're also on all of the social media platforms. And we're also happy to always have conversations with people. So I'll put that out there as well.
Thank you so much, Marc. This was fantastic.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you.
Thanks to Russ Phaneuf for giving me hosting duties today. And thanks, as always, to producer Curtis Schmidt. And thanks to you, NPFX listeners, for tuning in. I'm excited to bring you more interviews with other super cool folks like Marc, who are doing some very exciting work in the field of narrative strategy. And until then, keep telling great stories.
That concludes this episode of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. If you'd like to learn more about any of today's guests or resources, we'll include links in the show notes. If you like our podcast, please help spread the word. First, subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite app so you always know when a new episode is released. Second, forward episodes you like to friends and colleagues or post them on social media. Word of mouth is one of the best ways you can help share these conversations with more nonprofit professionals like yourself. And if you use Apple Podcasts or Audible, please leave us a review. Positive reviews are how many listeners find us, and they also help us understand what you like most about NPFX. Finally, we'd love to hear your suggestions. If there's a challenge you're facing, a question you have, or a voice you think the nonprofit sector needs to hear, send an email with the subject heading NPFX suggestion to contact@ipmadvancement.com. The Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange is just that, an exchange, and we're grateful that you're part of it. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.